Remember that Drexel professor who wanted white genocide for Christmas? I hate even saying that. Well, he's back, and he's now blaming whiteness for the Texas church shooting. Take a listen.
Whiteness is a structure of privilege, and it's a structure of power, and it's a structure that when it feels threatened, lashes out.
Wow. So is this another sign of chaos on college campuses, and is there anything that we can do about it?
Joining us right now is a psychology professor from the University of Toronto and the author of the upcoming book, 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Doctor, good morning to you. Thanks for making a couch call today.
You bet.
What do you make of this Drexel professor who's been in and out of the news so often, and now he's blaming that for the cause of the shooting in Texas?
I think he's applying his ideological formula to a very complex problem. And it's an easy thing to do. It's this sort of postmodern formula that's taught to university students everywhere now.
What is the formula?
Attribute everything to racial disparity and oppression, victimization.
Just everything?
Well, essentially, it's a recasting of Marxism, I would say. And with the Marxist theory, it was rich against poor, bourgeoisie against proletariat. And that was recast in the 1970s as oppression due to group identity, essentially. And so that's where identity politics came from. It's a formula you can learn in about a day, and then you can use it to explain everything.
College is designed to teach you to think about the world and prepare you for the world outside of college. How is this helping that, and what kind of students are we getting when they're 22, 23, whenever they graduate?
You have the tense wrong. College was that.
Understood.
So, and I don't think it is that in many cases now, especially in the liberal arts, and that's a real catastrophe.
Much different than my experience 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, things have changed dramatically in the last 5 years, I would say. And we saw this rise of political correctness in the 1990s. It burst forward in between 1990 and about 1993. And then it seemed to subside a little bit, but it's back with an absolute vengeance now. And we know that most of the university campuses, in the liberal arts anyways, are heavily dominated by leftist thinking, and radical leftist thinking for that matter.
Well, what happened, Doctor, in the early 90s to spawn this?
Well, I think it's popped up more or less repeatedly since the late 1960s. I'm not sure exactly why.
Started with the anti-war movement?
Yeah, with the anti-war movement, but there was a fair bit of radical thinking in the 1960s on the left side, and many of those people ended up teaching in universities. And so, and with the rise of postmodernism, that's a huge factor. That was a French intellectual school that was a transformation of Marxism into identity politics, essentially. And because I think, in some sense, because it requires almost no intellectual effort and leaves you with an overwhelming sense of moral superiority, it's very attractive to people. They're basically teaching young people, I would say, to be ideological avatars, to go act out this pernicious doctrine in the real world.
Well, some of them were doing that. They were howling at the moon. They were screaming in the night. They were upset at the year anniversary a few days ago of President Trump being elected. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of that is a kind of narcissism. I mean, that sort of public display. It's probably amplified to a great degree by social media and media in general, right? Because this sort of highly emotional display does make a reasonable news clip. But
what's the danger here?
Well, the danger is everywhere at the moment. The danger is increased polarization. We're seeing that nonstop at the moment, and I think it's mostly because the people on the radical left are pushing way too hard. That's my estimate. You see that in Canada as well as the United States and all around the Western world.
I want to ask you this because I live in a very Democratic state, Connecticut, right?
Yep.
None of my friends would ever operate like this. Now, granted, my friends are older. They find this reprehensible. So I mean, it seems like a lot of Democrats are fired up about this idiocy.
Oh, yeah. Well, lots of people who were in what you might describe as the liberal center are very unhappy that the political landscape on the left side has shifted way over to the radical leftist side. That's a very common sentiment now. And I think it's happening faster than people really understand. So it's almost impossible to overstate how influential these postmodern doctrines have become and how they're seeping in now into corporations, mostly through HR departments.
I read an article, and it was about Barbara Corcoran, and she was talking about people she hires and doesn't hire. And when she's investing in companies like we see on Shark Tank, she says if you're a victim, she hates the word victim and people who have that victimized mentality, where they are the victim, woe is me. Do you see that more and more? Is that like a millennial thing, or is it?
Well, it's a form of justification for the use of power. You know, if you're a victim and you can ascribe moral superiority to yourself, then you're justified in the use of force. And I did a paper with a student of mine who toured the mass graves in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia with the UN, and we looked at the precursors to genocide, and one of them was an enhanced sense of victimization. That allows you to lash out at the hypothetical perpetrators before they do anything, because you're being victimized. You saw the same thing to some degree in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Hitler. Hitler felt very victimized.
Yeah, Hitler claimed that the Jews were victimizing Germany, essentially. And so once you're a victim and you have all the moral status that goes along with being a victim, then you can't do any wrong, essentially. So.
Interesting discussion. Dr. Jordan Peterson's new book is called 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, which we certainly need now. Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much for the invitation.
The race is ending in a really ugly way. Earlier this week, the Latino Victory Fund released and then pulled an ad that attacks Republican Ed Gillespie's voters as racists who want to murder children. Democrat Ralph Northam's campaign has tried to distance itself from the ad, which is self-evidently disgusting. But not everyone agrees with that. LaDawn Jones was a Democratic member of the Georgia House of Representatives. She says that spot is perfectly defensible, and she joins us tonight. LaDawn, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me back, Tucker.
So I guess what bothers me about the ad, I mean, it's clearly race baiting, but it's also factually untrue. There are no Gillespie voters that I'm aware of who have run anyone down with a truck. This ad is only designed to play upon people's racial fears, and it's hard to see how anyone could defend it. How could you?
Well, I find it interesting that you've managed to poll all of the Gillespie voters to find out what they do in their private time. But, you know, as a political consultant,
I read the papers. Wait, hold on. Has a Gillespie voter run down a minority child with a truck ever? I mean, do you know something I don't?
Do you know that? I know here in Georgia, there was just a woman convicted and given 30 years because she did go to an African-American child's party with her Confederate flag flying on her truck, and they drove in circles as they called them the N-word. So that happens. It happened in 2017, and it happened to me in the early 2000s.
Look, the awful things happen for sure, and I never deny that. But this is a political ad in a governor's race aimed at a specific candidate and his voters, and there's no evidence that anything it suggests is true. There are no Gillespie voters who've done this. By the way, we just had a kind of mirror image of this in New York City this week, where a radical Muslim ran down people in a truck. One of the reasons they pulled this ad. Do you see any irony in that?
What I do see the most irony in is that in America, you can look at what happened in New York as terrorism, but when we talk about Charlottesville, in Virginia, where this race is going on, you pretend like that's not terrorism, as if that man with a Confederate flag on his car did not run over the poor woman, Heather Hayden. You know, so that's part of the problem that we have.
So slow down. I don't know who you're talking about. I would never defend that. It's appalling. I think that is a kind of terrorism. I mean, of course, it evoked terror in people. No one's defending that, certainly not on this show. But the point is,
this is a political ad. But you're saying that this is a non-realistic ad. And in America, what you have to understand is that there are Americans who are really afraid of this.
Okay, but hold on. This ad is designed to win votes for a candidate away from another candidate, to terrify people. And the ad says, this guy supports running down minority children. And that's a lie. And it's the worst kind of racial demagoguery because it's preying upon people's fears. It's the kind of thing the left is always denouncing. Oh, it's racial demagoguery. Here you have an example of racial demagoguery, and you're endorsing it. Why?
Well, you know what else that the right does? The right always says, we don't have time to be politically correct. Well, let me tell you what's something that's not politically correct in America. In America, there are Americans who are as afraid of someone running them over with a Confederate flag as they are of radical Islamic terrorism.
Sure,
and instead of running from this and shaming it, you need to say, you know what, this is an uglier part of American history. And whether it has to do with Ed Gillespie or not, I don't know. But I know it's a reality here in Georgia. I know it was my reality when I was a child.
Okay, first of all, you don't have a separate reality from anybody else. Reality exists independent of your
I think
views
you have
or
a separate
my
reality.
Views. No, look,
because
reality
you're not
exists.
recognizing what America is showing right now.
I don't want to have a philosophical conversation with you. I just want to make the point that this ad accuses somebody specific, Ed Gillespie, of a specific crime that neither he nor his voters have committed. Therefore, it is a lie. But more than that, it is bad precisely for the reasons you just explained. People are scared. This makes them more scared on the basis of a lie. Therefore, it's demagoguery. It brings us farther apart. Do you see what I'm saying?
Poor Tucker, what you don't realize is that without this ad, there were already Americans who were afraid of this reality. This ad just depicts that. And the fact that you're running from it and trying to fight that is the problem with America. It's the problem with Republicans. This is something that we are truly afraid of. In the same way you are.
Therefore, I'm part of the problem? I'm totally confused. Is there an Ed Gillespie supporter who's done this? Who?
Yes, there is. You are part of the problem not because you're objecting to a lie, but because you want to turn this into a lie. You want to turn it into as if Charlottesville never happened. You want to pretend as if white. Actually, it is. This is Virginia. This is a governor's race in Virginia. This is exactly about Charlottesville.
What did that have to do with Ed Gillespie? I mean, look, I'm trying to be reasonable. I'm not sure you're capable of it, but I'm trying to walk through this slowly and ask you, how does what happened in Charlottesville relate to Ed Gillespie? Why is he responsible for it? I mean, maybe I'm too literal. Maybe I'm like caught in, ancient linear thinking.
No, you're trying to be literal. And you know why you're trying to be literal? You're trying to be literal because you don't want to recognize that there are white people in America that can be as bad and worse terrorists as the Muslim terrorists that are here. And you're defending this ad not because it has anything to do with Ed Gillespie. You could care less about Ed Gillespie. What you care about is what it depicts. You want to show that the Confederate flag is a part of our heritage. I salute one flag. That's the American flag.
We're done. You're a deeply